Welcome to Secrets of History, where the past unveils its darkest mysteries. They said the house was alive. Not haunted, alive. It didn't creak, it sighed. It didn't stand still, it waited. Built in 1874, it was supposed to be a monument to success, a legacy carved from brick and ambition. But within a few short years, that legacy began to rot from the inside out. The family who built it called it home. The town called it something else, the house that ate its own. No one remembered when that name started, but everyone knew why. People who entered didn't stay the same if they left at all. The first owner vanished during a snowstorm, leaving a single candle burning in his study. His wife was found months later, her journal open on the desk, the final line smudged and unreadable. The servants quit one by one, saying the walls whispered back when you spoke. By the turn of the century, the house had already claimed 3 generations of its own bloodline. But it wasn't just the people who disappeared. Rooms shifted overnight. Staircases ended in ceilings that hadn't been there before. Architects tried to redraw the blueprints, but nothing stayed the same twice. It was as if the house was rebuilding itself, consuming what it no longer wanted. And yet, through all of this, no one tore it down. They said destroying it would only make it angry. So the town left it alone. Windows shuttered, doors chained, walls pulsing with whatever secrets had been sealed inside. And for nearly a century, the house slept, quiet, patient, and forgotten. Until someone finally opened the door again. The house was built in 1874 by a man named Nathaniel Ward. His money came quickly, and the way he spent it was even faster. He purchased a large plot of land on the outskirts of town, an area people avoided. Locals called it Hollow's End, a place where the earth never stayed still for long. The house began as a project of pride. Workers complained that their tools went missing, materials shifted overnight, and the structure seemed to change size from one week to the next. The foundation, poured deep into Hollow's End, never seemed to dry completely. Some said they could hear something moving beneath the concrete, like air pockets breathing under the ground. When one worker fell into a sinkhole and was never recovered, the town priest urged Nathaniel to stop construction. He refused. He said the house demanded to be finished. By the time it was completed, the house stood 3 stories tall, with 6 to 7 rooms, though no one could ever agree on the exact number. His letters grew paranoid, written in a frantic, uneven hand. He wrote of hearing whispers behind the walls, of footsteps in the attic when no one was there. By winter, Nathaniel had stopped answering his mail. The last anyone saw of him, he was standing in the doorway of his home, whispering to the bricks as though they were listening. It was the townspeople who gave it the name *, the house that ate its own. People swore the house was changing, consuming pieces of itself from the inside out. Shutters vanished overnight, window frames sealed shut as though they had never existed. The house wasn't falling apart, it was rearranging itself. When the second family purchased the property after Nathaniel's disappearance, they believed the stories were exaggerated. Within a month, they began to notice small things, doors that opened on their own, mirrors that reflected empty hallways instead of the rooms behind them, a faint hum in the walls at night that no one could locate. Neighbors later recalled how the Whitlocks began to act strange. The children stopped playing outside. One maid told her sister before leaving that she saw the house swallow a section of the West Wing hallway, that one moment it was there, and the next it was gone, the wallpaper closing in like flesh sealing a wound. By autumn, the Whitlocks stopped answering letters. When officials finally broke in, they discovered the piano sitting in the grand hall, still perfectly tuned, though every single key had been pressed down and held there as if someone had leaned their weight on it all at once. The family was never found. But what if the disappearances were just the beginning? What the next family discovered inside those walls was far more terrifying than any ghost. They found that the house didn't just take people, it remembered them. From the outside, the house looked grand, timeless, and perfectly still. There was something deliberate about its stillness, a quiet that felt less like peace and more like waiting. Even the air around it seemed thicker, the kind of silence that hums just beneath the surface of hearing. People who lived nearby claimed that no matter how long the house stood abandoned, it never collected dust or decay like it should have. It was as if the house refused to age. A few brave souls who ventured close enough said they could hear a faint ticking sound coming from within, rhythmic and steady, like the heartbeat of something alive. But the people who stepped inside said it never stopped breathing. From the moment the door closed behind them, they claimed the air seemed to move not in drafts or breezes, but in slow, deliberate inhalations, as though the house itself was alive and aware of their presence. Visitors often described an unexplainable weight pressing against their chests. Another account came from a caretaker hired briefly in the 1920s. When he tried to sleep in the parlor, he woke up gasping for air, convinced someone had placed a hand over his mouth. Even skeptics couldn't deny that strange things happened once inside. Matches wouldn't light near the grand staircase, photographs taken in the hallways came out blurred and distorted, and clocks, no matter how often they were wound, always stopped at 3:17 in the morning. The house didn't just exist, it interacted. Walls shifted, floors sank, and doors closed themselves, as if the house had a pulse that no one could control. Some even said the house rearranged itself when no one was watching, shifting pieces of its body the way a creature might turn in its sleep. It wasn't only the structure that changed, the atmosphere did too. One visiting journalist in the early 1900s claimed to have walked down a corridor that grew longer with every step, a hallway that seemed to breathe him in until he panicked and turned back. Even the furniture seemed complicit. The house responded to emotion, it seemed to know when someone was afraid. Those who raised their voice or slammed a door claimed the floors trembled beneath them. People began to whisper that the foundation wasn't just built on cursed ground, it was becoming part of it, devouring its own bones to stay standing. And just when you think you understand the horror, consider this. The house wasn't merely changing its shape. It was learning from its victims, growing smarter with each life it consumed, perfecting its methods of trapping the next soul brave enough to cross its threshold. The first owner, Nathaniel Ward, was a man of control, or at least he believed himself to be. Yet the incidents grew worse. Servants found furniture moved from one room to another overnight. The clock in the dining hall would stop every evening at the same moment, 3:17 a.m. As the winter months arrived, he withdrew from society altogether. One note, dated only a week before his disappearance, reads, "I hear it breathing under the floor again. It isn't the wind. It waits for me to speak first." When the snowstorm of 1877 came, Nathaniel was seen outside just once, standing barefoot in the snow, staring up at the second-floor windows as if someone or something was watching him from within. The next morning, his dinner untouched. The house was completely silent, except for one faint sound that the constable swore he heard while searching the main hall, a low, rhythmic thud, like something beating slowly within the walls. All they discovered was his diary, open on the desk in his study, its final entry written in hurried scrawl, "It wants what built it." His wife, Eleanor Ward, followed soon after, though her end was far stranger than her husband's disappearance. The servants, what few remained, said she spoke to the walls as if they were listening, pausing after every sentence as though waiting for a reply. Her diary, found years later hidden behind a false panel in her dressing room, revealed the depth of her delusion. "It needs something alive to stay awake," she wrote in one entry, "something that belongs to it." The final pages of her diary are the most disturbing. One passage reads, "Nathaniel is in the walls. I hear him call for me at night. He says the house is hungry. Asterisk her last entry ends mid-sentence, the ink smudged across the page. No one ever found her body. The servants were the first to speak openly about what they'd heard and what they'd seen. Some claimed they could make out words, crying, laughter, the faint rhythm of a lullaby sung in a language none of them recognized. The butler, a man named Harland, confessed that he would hear footsteps pacing above him at night when he knew no one occupied the upper floor. One evening, while inspecting the cellar, he claimed to have found fresh mortar sealing off a section of the wall that hadn't been there before. By then, most of the servants had fled. The last housemaid to leave said she awoke one night to find her bed surrounded by faint indentations in the dust, as though dozens of feet had been circling her as she slept. By 1903, the house had already devoured 3 generations of the same family. After Nathaniel and Eleanor's disappearances, the property passed to their nephew, Charles Ward, a man who saw opportunity where others saw doom. For a while, it worked. Laughter returned to the estate. But the calm never lasted. The first signs were almost imperceptible. Witnesses described it as a low, dragging noise beneath the floorboards, rhythmic and deliberate, like something heavy being pulled slowly through the walls. A month later, he was gone. His carriage was found overturned near the front gate, but his body was never recovered. His wife, Margaret, stayed for another year, convinced he would return. She wrote to her sister that the house refused to let her leave, that every attempt to walk down the drive ended with her standing again at the front door. By the time the 3rd generation inherited it, no one wanted to live there. 3 generations gone, and still the house stood unchanged, unbroken, as though it was keeping count. But the house's hunger wasn't satisfied with just one family. As decades passed, it began to develop a taste for something new, not just the bloodlines of its builders, but the very skepticism of those who tried to expose its secrets. By 1911, the house had earned its nickname. Local newspapers began covering the estate again. Reporters described the mansion as a monument to misfortune, an architectural relic that seemed to rot from the inside out. When new caretakers were hired, they seldom lasted more than a few weeks. One man claimed he saw the hallway walls shift slightly when he wasn't looking, as if the structure itself was breathing. What no one could explain was how the house seemed to resist decay despite decades of neglect. Builders who inspected it claimed that parts of the foundation had fused into the earth in ways that defied logic, as if the structure had grown roots. In time, the estate became a forbidden topic in Hollow's End. Maps no longer labeled it, and its location was quietly omitted from public records. Yet still, the house remained, its windows glimmering faintly under the moonlight. Some said the lights flickered not from the reflection of the moon but from something moving within, something that had grown stronger with every life it consumed, waiting for the next name to be written into its walls. By the time the final occupant of the house arrived, the property had already become a cautionary tale. It was 1923 when a man named Edwin Holloway, a historian and self-proclaimed skeptic of the supernatural, purchased the estate at auction. When he moved in, he kept a meticulous journal. Within weeks, Holloway began reporting strange phenomena, books rearranging themselves on shelves, portraits shifting slightly in their frames, and doors closing despite the absence of wind. Neighbors began noticing changes in Holloway's behavior. He stopped coming into town, stopped answering letters. A postman who once delivered a parcel claimed he heard 2 voices conversing from within the study, one belonging to Holloway, and the other, unmistakably, that of a woman. But Holloway lived alone. Months later, the estate fell silent once again. When local authorities finally entered the house, they found no trace of Holloway, only his journal left open on the desk. The final entry was brief and almost incoherent. Asterisk the walls remember. They breathe when the house is hungry. Asterisk. In 1949, nearly 3 decades after Edwin Holloway vanished, The property was finally disturbed again, not by settlers or historians, but by a construction company hired to demolish what was left of the decaying structure. It started small, almost unnoticeable at first. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Another crew member fell through a section of rotted flooring and emerged shaking, claiming he had seen faces in the walls, faint but human, as though the plaster itself had absorbed something alive. The next morning, every piece of heavy machinery on site was found overturned or drained of oil. It was then that they noticed something even stranger: the blueprints for the property no longer matched the layout of the actual house. Rooms that were meant to exist had vanished. Others, previously sealed, now stood open. It was as though the structure had rearranged itself overnight. When the project was abruptly cancelled, locals began reporting strange lights in the night sky above the property. A farmer swore he saw the outline of the house glowing faintly. He said it looked like it was breathing, swelling slightly, then sinking back, as if the ground beneath it moved. What happened next would prove that the house wasn't just a local legend. It was evolving, adapting to modern technology, and about to claim its victims in ways nobody could have predicted. By the early 1960s, the Holloway property had fallen deep into obscurity. But in 1964, a group of 4 high school friends decided to push farther. What happened that night would change the town's relationship with the property forever. They entered just after midnight. Once inside, they found the house in a state of ruin. Yet, as Jacob later recalled in a statement, the deeper they went, the more the atmosphere seemed to shift. The house wasn't just abandoned, it felt alert. The temperature dropped, and the light from their flashlights dimmed inexplicably. They explored room after room until they reached what appeared to be a parlor. When Jacob pulled it down, the reflection that looked back was wrong, not delayed or distorted, but different. He swore he saw all 4 of them standing still, but behind their reflections was a 5th figure, standing just over Erin's shoulder. She screamed before he could react, claiming she felt something cold brush her neck. The group bolted for the exit, but the hallway they came through had changed. Doors were in new places, walls seemed to have shifted, and the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed from somewhere above. When they finally escaped, hours had passed, though to them it had felt like minutes. The police found them sitting on the roadside, pale and trembling. Jacob's camera was shattered, the film inside warped and blackened as if burned. Within a year, all had moved away, their friendships dissolved without explanation. By the late 1970s, the legend of the Holloway estate had transformed from a local ghost story into something that intrigued outsiders. But in 1978, one team from a small college in Massachusetts managed to secure permission to study the site for a documentary on American folklore. What they found inside the Holloway estate would never make it into their documentary. They arrived on an unusually cold October morning and set up equipment. But within an hour, the recordings began to pick up something else: faint noises in the background, rhythmic and human in tone. A whisper, then a distant hum, then, unmistakably, the sound of someone speaking their names. Dr. Crane initially dismissed it as interference, until one of the students, Martin Hale, began to behave erratically. He insisted he could hear the house breathing and that something inside the walls was trying to get out. When they tried to leave, the front door wouldn't open. The hinges groaned but held firm, as if the wood had fused together. Panic set in. Another student claimed the stairs had changed, that the landing now led to a hallway none of them had seen before. When rescuers finally arrived, they found the team outside, standing silently in the yard. The door had been forced open from within, but none of them could explain how. Martin Hale never returned to school. Dr. Crane withdrew her research, refusing interviews for the rest of her life, just before the final seconds captured a whisper so clear it chilled even the police who reviewed it: "You shouldn't have woken us." As we move into the modern era, The house would reveal its most terrifying ability yet, not just to consume those who entered, but to reach through cameras and recordings, making itself known to the world while remaining forever hidden. By 1986, the Holloway estate had become a forbidden landmark. But that year, the property drew the attention of a private developer named Lawrence Price. The photographs would later become the last images ever taken inside the Holloway estate before it vanished from public record. The inspection started smoothly. But the photographer, a woman named Dana Collier, noticed something off about her pictures. Each time she snapped a photo, the images came out strangely distorted blurs in the shape of faces, dark streaks along the walls that didn't appear in real life. He turned a corner and saw the long, central corridor of the house stretching far beyond its natural length, as if the structure had grown while he walked. When he called out for Dana, his voice echoed back with a delay, as though something else repeated it a moment later. That night, Price developed the photographs himself, only to find the final frame contained something he couldn't rationalize, a reflection of the three of them standing together, but behind them, clear and unmistakable, were dozens of shadowy figures lining the walls. 2 weeks later, Lawrence Price abruptly sold the property at a loss. The architect moved out of state, and Dana Collier was found dead in her apartment, her cause of death ruled as heart failure at just 31. Some say the photographs she took that day were destroyed, but others claim a few prints survived. Those who've seen them say the faces on the walls aren't blurred at all. They're screaming. In 1992, the Holloway estate reappeared in public record under strange circumstances. When officials investigated, they found the gate broken and signs of habitation inside, but carved into the rotted wood of the front door were the words "I found them." Then a week later, police discovered a man wandering aimlessly along a back road 5 miles from the estate. His name was Thomas Reed. Reed's account. He claimed he hadn't gone there to steal or seek shelter, he just felt drawn to it. He described hearing movement in the ceiling and faint laughter coming from what he thought was an empty hallway. When asked if he saw anyone, Reed paused before answering that he saw shapes. By the third night, he said he'd found a door he didn't remember seeing before. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading down into the earth. Then he saw the faces. He told officers that the faces were in the walls, layered over each other, stretching and twisting as if trying to speak. When Reed was released from questioning, he disappeared again and was never seen. The officers who searched the house afterward confirmed one odd detail, though the phrase carved on the door had been rewritten, deeper this time, as if with a blade. It now read, "They found me." And now we reach the digital age, where the house would find its most powerful feeding ground yet, the endless curiosity of the internet, drawing in victims from across the world without ever needing to leave its foundation. By the early 2000s, the Holloway estate had all but disappeared from official maps. In 2003, a trio of explorers known for documenting abandoned places on early internet message boards made the trip to Hollow's End with handheld cameras and crude night vision gear. Their plan was to livestream their exploration. The stream, however, would end abruptly after just 37 minutes, and what it captured in that short time became one of the most debated and disturbing pieces of early internet lore. The footage began normally. About 10 minutes in, one of them remarked that their compass wasn't functioning, the needle spun aimlessly no matter how he turned it. Soon after, their audio began to distort. The viewers watching the live feed reported hearing faint whispering behind the explorers' voices, though the group themselves didn't appear to notice. At the 20-minute mark, one of them, identified only as R, walked into a back corridor while the others examined a collapsed stairwell. He turned his camera toward the wall and said something that was later transcribed as, "It looks wet." The camera shook slightly, and then there was a brief flash, something like a hand pressed against the lens from the other side. I screamed, the camera fell, and the feed glitched. The other two explorers called for him, their voices rising in panic. They searched for several minutes before finding the camera still recording on the floor. Was gone. The remaining footage showed them running through the house, disoriented and terrified, claiming that the front door had vanished. The walls, they said, were moving. At minute 37, the stream ended mid-sentence as one of them shouted, "It's not the same room." Both were unharmed but refused to speak publicly about what happened. When pressed, one simply said, "We weren't supposed to see it." By 2011, the Holloway estate had become more than just a ghost story, it had turned into an online obsession. But one man, an investigative journalist named David Larkin, decided to go further than anyone else. According to his early notes, he suspected the government had intervened sometime after 1978 to conceal whatever had been found on the property. He started with land registry documents that appeared to have been altered. When he requested access to the county archives, he discovered that the file for the Holloway property had been sealed under public safety restrictions. Larkin filed formal requests, but before he received a response, he was contacted by a retired surveyor who claimed to have worked on the land in the 1950s. The man told him about blueprints that had never matched the real layout, about staircases that weren't there one day and were the next, and about something they'd found under the foundation, a chamber of stone that didn't appear on any plans. Driven by that lead, Larkin managed to obtain satellite images of the area. He noticed that the land beneath the supposed ruins emitted unusual heat signatures, particularly around what would have been the cellar. He contacted a thermal imaging expert, who told him, half-jokingly, that it looked like something was still breathing down there. Then, abruptly, Larkin's update stopped. His last blog post was brief, followed by a sentence that read, "If this doesn't post again by morning, don't look for me, look under it." He was never heard from again. His car was later found near the old access road, its engine still warm and headlights on. The only item missing from his belongings was his camera. Weeks later, his blog mysteriously vanished from the internet, along with every cached copy. But the most terrifying revelation is yet to come. What researchers discovered in the final years wasn't just evidence of a haunted house, it was proof that the structure was never a house at all, but something far more ancient and hungry that had learned to wear a house like a skin. By 2015, the story of the Holloway estate had resurfaced yet again, this time through a true crime podcast that focused on unsolved disappearances across rural America. The host, Emma Clark. In her first episode, she dissected the timeline of events surrounding the Holloway estate, noting that nearly every decade, someone connected to the property vanished or died under unclear circumstances. She began interviewing locals, but one elderly woman, Margaret Fenn, agreed to talk. Her grandfather had worked as a caretaker on the estate during the late 1800s. She told Clark that her grandfather had once overheard something through the floorboards while repairing pipes in the basement. He said there were voices, not arguments, but chanting. Margaret remembered him saying, "They were building something down there that wasn't meant for people." When Clark asked what he meant, Margaret hesitated before replying. He said it wasn't a house. It was a body that learned how to be a house. The phrase struck Clark deeply, and she used it as the title for her final episode. She began cross-referencing every known structure on the property, including the blueprints that had mysteriously changed over time. That's when she noticed something horrifying: the design of the house, as drawn across different decades, seemed to grow. Rooms multiplied. Corridors extended. But not randomly. They seemed to form patterns, spiraling inward like veins feeding a living thing. It was as though each new owner had unconsciously added to a structure that was still becoming something. Clark's last upload ended with an audio clip she claimed was taken near the foundation of the original site, faint knocking, followed by a low moan that lasted nearly a minute. She signed off by saying she was driving to Hollow's End to record one final episode on location. She never released it. 2 weeks later, Listeners noticed her website had gone offline, and her social media accounts were deleted without notice. Local authorities found her car abandoned on a dirt road not far from where David Larkins had been discovered 3 years prior. Inside was her microphone, still recording. The final file contained 3 minutes of silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open and a whisper that said, "Welcome back." The year 2018 brought a strange resurgence of interest in the Holloway estate after a group of amateur urban explorers uploaded footage of what they claimed was the property's remains. The footage began innocently enough, but as they reached the clearing, the tone shifted. Before them stood not a complete house, but fragments of one pieces of brickwork swallowed by tree roots, a collapsed archway, and a staircase that led up to nothing. The atmosphere was heavy, the sound eerily muffled despite the wind rustling around them. One of the explorers, who went by the name Cole, said it felt like the forest was breathing. As they ventured deeper into what remained of the structure, their flashlights began to flicker. But it was what they found in the basement that disturbed viewers the most. The stairs descended into a narrow corridor lined with strange etchings carved directly into the foundation stone. Some resembled human figures, others looked like twisting shapes spiraling inward, identical to symbols previously shown in the 1902 police sketches Clark had uncovered. The footage grew shakier as they moved forward, one of them whispering that he could hear something moving behind the walls. Then, a faint thudding began, rhythmic, deliberate, like footsteps in the next room. The final 30 seconds of the clip were chaotic, screaming, the camera hitting the ground, and a glimpse of what appeared to be a door opening in the stone, revealing a hollow space that seemed to breathe in dust and light before the video cut to black. Authorities later confirmed that 2 of the 3 explorers returned safely, but Cole was never found. The house, or whatever remained of it, became an internet obsession, a symbol of humanity's morbid curiosity with places that resist death. By 2020, the legend of the Holloway estate had evolved from local folklore into a full-blown cultural phenomenon. Then, a new discovery reignited public interest. A historian from Boston University, Dr. Evelyn Cray, published a paper claiming to have found evidence linking the Holloway family to a series of disappearances dating back to 1893. Her research included a trove of handwritten letters exchanged between members of the family and an unidentified correspondent who referred to the estate as the vessel. In one letter, dated November 4, 1898, a Holloway cousin wrote, "The walls are restless again. The house wants what it was promised." As Cray's research spread, skeptics demanded proof. In response, she released several high-resolution scans of the original letters and receipts tied to contractors who worked on the estate's foundation. Those documents showed unexplained gaps in the construction records, entire weeks unaccounted for, as though portions of the estate were built without formal oversight. Shortly after her paper gained traction, she went silent. Colleagues claimed she had taken a sabbatical, but others noted that her research files were removed from the university's public database, and her professional email was deactivated without explanation. Months later, an anonymous post appeared online containing a single image, a blurred photo of a stone doorway partially buried in soil, resembling the same arch seen in the explorer's video. Beneath it, the caption read, "The vessel still stands." The final key to the Holloway mystery emerged not from an academic archive or historical society but from an unassuming estate sale in 2023. A man named Patrick Doyle discovered what appeared to be the original blueprints of the Holloway estate, but they were unlike any architectural plans he had ever seen. Instead of logical floor divisions, the drawings showed hallways looping into themselves, staircases ending mid-air, and rooms drawn in duplicate, as if the house had multiple versions of the same space coexisting at once. Some sections were marked with phrases like "do not seal" and "keep open for passage," written in faded ink. Along the borders of the parchment, strange notations, not in English, nor any identifiable language, traced the structure like a living organism. But the biggest anomaly came from the paper itself. Analysis revealed it wasn't ordinary parchment but treated with a chemical mixture containing bone ash and traces of human calcium. As the news broke, online communities reignited the conversation surrounding the Holloway estate. Theories swirled that the house was not merely haunted but constructed to channel or contain something. Linguists began decoding the writings along the blueprint's margins and found recurring references to consumption, renewal, and return. One unsettling phrase appeared repeatedly: the house feeds. Within days of the blueprint's appearance online, the original files were taken down, and Doyle himself stopped responding to journalists. In his last recorded interview, Doyle mentioned a chilling detail. While sorting through the documents, he noticed faint smudges appearing on the blueprints, like oily fingerprints that hadn't been there before. When he left the papers overnight in his garage, he returned the next morning to find the plans slightly altered, certain rooms had shifted positions, and a new mark, shaped like a doorway, had appeared near the house's center. What followed was the final act of the story, a silence that spread like a shadow. The storage facility where the documents had been found burned down weeks later under unexplained electrical failure. The archived photos of the blueprints vanished from nearly every site that had hosted them. Historians trying to track the original copies met with dead ends, and Doyle's name disappeared from public records. Whether these events were coincidental or deliberate attempts to suppress something larger remains unknown, but one thing became clear: whatever was hidden inside that estate had never truly stayed buried. As the shadows of this unsolved mystery fade into the past, the secrets of history await you. Subscribe now to Secrets of History, and join us as we unearth more chilling tales from the abyss of time. Hit that bell icon, and let the past whisper its truths to you next time.